I knocked on my son's door with a suitcase in one hand and my late husband's coat over my shoulders. The porch light flickered, and when he opened, he didn't hug me. He just stared past me like I was a stranger selling something. "Not my problem," he said, and the door clicked shut. Before I tell you what happened next, how those 3 words turned into the sharpest blade and how I learned to hold it by the handle, not the edge, subscribe and tell me in the comments which country and city you're watching from. Because this story, it's not just about a door closing. It's about the rooms I learned to open after. It had rained all day, the kind of stubborn rain that makes the air feel like a wet sweater you can't peel off. By evening, the storm had drained into a steady drip from the maple trees on Hawthorne Lane, the street where my son, Matt, bought his first house. A little blue Cape Cod with white shutters and a new mailbox his wife decorated with a vinyl script that read, "The Bennetts." There wasn't a single trace of my last name on that house, though I'd written the first check that made it possible. I stood on their porch with the suitcase I bought when my husband, Daniel, and I took our 25th anniversary trip to Charleston. A suitcase that came home with pralines, a sunburn, and a photograph of us laughing in a horse-drawn carriage. Tonight, it held a pair of jeans, 2 sweaters, my pills, and a letter from the bank. The letter was light as paper and heavy as a cinder block. The porch light buzzed. Moths threw themselves at it with a kind of desperate faith, and for a moment I felt like one of them, drawn toward a brightness that did not love me back. The door opened. Warm air spilled out, scented with butter and rosemary. Someone was baking. Matt filled the doorway, broad shoulders like his father's, the cowlick I used to flatten with a wet hand before school pictures. For a heartbeat, I saw his first-grade face inside the grown man's and almost said his nickname, the one only I used. But then his mouth flattened into a line I recognized from the last few years, the line that meant we were about to have a conversation with no soft edges. "Mom?" he said, as if the word had rust on it. "Hi, sweetheart." My voice came out neat and small. I was hoping I could stay here for a little while. There are a dozen ways to refuse someone kindly. He didn't pick any of them. "Not now," he said. "We're in the middle of dinner." He angled his body, as if to block my view. I already knew what I'd see. His wife, Olivia, lit by the warm cone of a pendant lamp, arranging salad in a bowl the size of a bird bath, the gold splash of a Chardonnay bottle, cloth napkins rolled tight with rings that looked like little bracelets. Home. The one I thought would be mine in the soft way a mother's presence lives in the corners, the way a certain chair becomes hers by habit. "It won't be long," I said. "Just until I figure some things out." "Things?" He leaned on the word, like it had too many syllables. "Mom, we talked about boundaries. You said you were fine." "I said I would be," I corrected, the past tense tasting like chalk. "And I will be. Matt, I need a few nights." I lifted the suitcase an inch, letting it thump down gently. "Please." That's when Olivia appeared over his shoulder, a smile fixed perfectly on her face, the kind of smile that reads nicely in photos and poorly up close. She had a towel over one shoulder, a sprig of rosemary in her other hand, like a wand. "Margaret," she said brightly, and then took in the suitcase. The brightness dimmed. "Is everything all right?" I inhaled, and all at once the damp of the night, the butter in the air, the old wool of my husband's coat braided into a single rope that pulled tight around my throat. "I just need a place to sleep, for a few days." I looked at my son, not her. "Your father, Daniel, he always said this house was a start, not an ending. He said it was ours in a way." Olivia's smile cracked at the edges. "This is our home," she said, and there was an emphasis on our that used to be a whisper, but lately had become a siren. "We really wish you'd called first." "I did," I said softly. "I called 3 times. Matt shifted. Work's been crazy." "When isn't it?" I meant it as a joke. It fell like a stone. The rain started up again, fine and needling. It stitched a cold seam down my spine. I saw it then, in a flash so sharp it made me blink. I was a problem to be managed, not a mother to be sheltered. "I got a letter from the bank," I said. "About the house, Daniel's pension. There was an error, a gap. I'll fix it. The furnace went and I paid the hospital and then, it's temporary." "Mom," he said, and the word lacked any of the sweetness it once held. "We can't do this." "Do what?" "This," he repeated, and his hand made a small, helpless circle in the air, as if he were stirring a pot of something he didn't want to taste. "You show up. It's a lot. Matt," I said, and a memory rose without my permission. Him at 14, vomiting into a trash can between innings because heat stroke doesn't care about doubleheaders. Me pressing a cold bottle to the back of his neck and saying, "Lean on me, okay? That's what I'm here for." We did not keep score that day, but I did. Olivia touched his arm. A gentle nudge, a decision. "We can help you find a motel," she said. "There's a decent one off the highway. We can cover 2 nights. Not my problem." He didn't say it yet, but it was already walking toward me on quiet feet. "I don't want a motel," I said. "I want my son." The porch swallowed the words like it had been built to do that very thing. Something flared in his eyes then, guilt or anger or some complicated blend that turns love into something unrecognizable. He glanced over his shoulder, into the warm cone of light where a roast was waiting to be basted, where a table sparkled with the life he'd built. I saw fear there too, thin as a hairline crack in glass. Fear that I would pull a chair out and sit down. Fear that I would not leave. "Mom," he exhaled. "We're starting a family." He didn't touch Olivia's belly. There was no belly yet, only the idea of one, but the gesture hovered in the air between them anyway. "We need space, and I need shelter," I said. I did not apologize for it. I could feel the weight of the suitcase handle burning a groove into my palm. "Just a few days." He looked down at my hand then, at the old rings I still wore, at the band Daniel had slid on my finger in a church with windows the color of candy. I saw something soft move across his face and tried to catch it, tried to reel it in like a fish that had just nibbled the hook. Olivia's voice cut the line. "We can do 2 nights at the motel," she said again, firmer. "We'll bring you groceries." There is a particular humiliation in being offered charity by someone who once asked you to hem their dress because the tailor was too expensive. I felt it rise in my chest like heat. "I'm not asking for a handout," I said. "I'm asking for a couch." And that's when he said it, the sentence that would become a refrain, an echo, a ghost I would learn to live with and talk back to. "Mom," he said, tired and final. "It's not my problem." Everything in me went still, the way a lake hardens into ice overnight. No ripples, just a surface that looks like quiet and is actually a trap. I swallowed once, twice. The rain made a glittering veil around the porch light. I could see my reflection in the small window beside the door, a watery smear of a woman in a man's coat. Daniel's coat. "Right," I said. The word slid out of my mouth as if it had been waiting for this exact shape. "Of course." He shifted, uncomfortable. "I'll text you the motel address." "Don't," I said gently, and even I was surprised by how level my voice sounded. "I remember where it is." He opened his mouth to say something else. An apology, maybe? The kind that fixes nothing and lives forever like a stain. But Olivia called from the kitchen that the roast needed resting, and a timer chimed, and he did not say it. "Good night, Mom," he said instead, because people like to wrap ugly things in tidy words. "Good night," I answered, because I was raised to send people into their evenings with grace. The door closed. It didn't slam. The quiet click felt worse. I stood there for another moment, listening to the muffled noise of silverware and plates, the clink and murmur of married life. It sounded like a language I used to speak fluently and now couldn't remember the first word of. When I walked down the steps, the suitcase bumped each one, a small, stupid drumbeat echoing my heartbeat. The night smelled like wet leaves and rosemary. I thought of the first meal I cooked in the house I'd just left behind, Daniel and I sitting on folding chairs because the furniture hadn't arrived, eating spaghetti from bowls, laughing every time the spoon slipped. We were so young we thought mercy was guaranteed. My car sat at the curb under a streetlight where moths were losing their minds. I popped the trunk and lifted the suitcase with both hands, feeling the bright ache of something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. It was a third thing, a sharper thing. A thing that made my spine lengthen and my jaw unclench. I drove without turning on the radio. The wipers beat time like a metronome, and in the rhythm I heard other sentences, older ones. "Lean on me," I had said to the boy with the cowlick. "We're a team," Daniel used to say, when the mortgage came due and the dishwasher died in the same week. "You'll always have a place with me," I told my son when he left for college, and grew into a man so quickly I could almost hear the tendons stretching. Parking lot gravel crunched under my tires. I pulled in crooked and didn't bother fixing it. The motel's neon sign buzzed in a tired pink script that read, Vacancy. I stared at it until the letters untied and retied themselves into different words. I could make nothing out of them that meant home. Inside the lobby, a television murmured to no one, and the ficus in the corner had lost more leaves than it had kept. The clerk slid a clipboard toward me without looking up from his phone. I signed my name on a line that was too thin for a life like mine, and he handed me a key with a plastic tag that read 12B. It was heavier than I expected, and the weight steadied me. The room smelled like old coffee and cleaner that tried too hard. I set the suitcase on the bedspread, the kind with a pattern designed to hide stains, and took off Daniel's coat. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I opened the suitcase and pulled out the bank's letter. The words still did their ugly little dance across the page, but I made myself read them slowly until they stopped moving. In the bathroom, the mirror was spotted with something no one had bothered to wipe. I wiped it with a rough towel and stared at the woman looking back at me, wrinkles deeper around the mouth than last year, hair in need of a trim, eyes that had seen their share of birthdays and funerals. I lifted my chin until I recognized the angle. My mother used to say a woman should know how to square her shoulders in the dark. I switched off the light and practiced. Back in the main room, the air conditioner rattled to life with a clank that sounded like an old engine agreeing to give me one more mile. I lay on top of the bedspread because I didn't trust what lived inside it and pulled Daniel's coat over my chest like a blanket. In the pocket, my fingers found a folded scrap of paper that had been there since our Charleston trip, a list of restaurants he wanted to try in his careful block letters. I traced the names with my fingertip, remembering the way he'd laugh when a waiter put too much lemon in his water and how he'd whisper, "Come on, Maggie, life likes it when we lick our fingers." The ceiling had a watermark the shape of Florida. I stared at it long enough that it became a map, and I mapped a route I didn't know yet. Maybe I'd sell the house, or maybe I'd fight for it, or maybe I'd do the thing I was always afraid to do, start over with only myself to answer to. But before the route came the next step, and that was simpler than people admit. Sleep, wake, breathe, call the bank again, call Daniel's old lawyer, call the part of myself that didn't take no for an ending. My phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from Matt. Motel address is... I didn't open it. Another message blinked. Newer. Hope you're okay. No period. The absence of a dot made it look half-hearted, as if his thumb had grown tired of finishing what his mouth had started. I typed and erased 3 replies. In the end, I wrote nothing. Silence is a language, too. Sometimes it says exactly what you need it to. I turned off the light. In the dark, the air conditioner's rattle became waves, the hum of the mini-fridge, crickets. I closed my eyes and listened for Daniel, for the part of him that had been a steady drum in my chest for 32 years. I didn't hear him. I heard myself, breathing. It was enough. Tomorrow, I told the ceiling Florida. Tomorrow I will knock on a different kind of door, and when it opens, I will be the light behind it. Morning found me the way mornings do, unimpressed by last night's disasters, insistent about coffee. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the bank letter unfolded like a bad fortune and dialed the number at the bottom again. The hold music was a cheerful flute that made me want to put my head through drywall. When a woman finally answered, her voice was pleasant and remote, like the weather on a radio station you don't listen to by choice. "I understand," she said after I explained everything twice, the way you do when people think the second telling will be tidier than the first. But the system shows a suspension of benefits pending verification of spousal contributions. Processing time is currently 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8? I swallowed the rest of the sentence, because yelling at someone with no last name you can pronounce is like throwing stones at fog. "Is there anything sooner?" "Expedites are for emergencies," she said. "I'm in a motel," I said. She paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can make a note." The clack of her keyboard was the sound of nothing meaningful happening. "Thank you," I said anyway, because my mother taught me to leave rooms the way I want to find them, with dignity intact. I hung up and watched a sunbeam try to find a clean spot on the carpet. I texted Daniel's old attorney, a man named Walsh with a square jaw and a fondness for Latin phrases, asking for an appointment. "I can squeeze you in Thursday," he wrote, squeeze, as if I were a lemon. "Bring anything you have." What I had: a stack of bills, $23 in my wallet, a house with a furnace that coughed like a smoker, and a son who thought proximity turned love into liability. I made a list in the motel's complimentary notepad, Call, bank, Walsh, utility company, doctor. Guyan for prescription refill. Find, temp work, food pantry hours, the box of Daniel's files in the garage. Do. Breathe. Stop apologizing for existing. Remember, you are not a fire hazard. At 9, I drove to the diner off Route 12, the one where they still serve coffee in cups that chip like old teeth. The glass door stuck halfway, and I had to use my shoulder to persuade it. The bell above jingled with a determination that felt personal. "Seat yourself," a waitress called, sliding plates with the easy grace of someone who could juggle knives if she felt like it. Her hair was the color of honey and tied up with a pencil. I sat at the counter so I could watch her move through the wreckage of the breakfast rush like a woman who used to dance professionally and now danced with toast. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured generously. "You look like you need something real," she said, and set down a blueberry muffin that had seen better days. "Stale is still bread." "Bless you," I said, and meant it. A help wanted sign was taped beside the register, sun faded at the edges. I tapped it. Still true? The waitress, her name tag said Rita, cocked her head. "True as taxes. You serving experience?" "I've served my share," I said. "Mostly family meals and church potlucks. But I can learn. Fast." She studied me the way good people do, not trying to fix, just trying to see. "You got a steady hand?" "Steadier than it looks." "You come back at 4, she said. "Ask for Manny. He's the kind of man who hires on instinct and regrets it later. It's part of his charm." I laughed, and the laugh surprised me by sounding like mine. "Thank you." When the check came, she had written 0 and underlined it twice. "Pays to be early," she said. "You look like someone who's been on time her whole life and got punished for it." Outside, the sun had climbed just high enough to make the motel's pink sign look almost hopeful. I drove to my house and sat in the driveway for a full minute before I got out, the way you do when the ground is full of ghosts and you don't want to step on their tails. The front steps needed paint. The hydrangeas I planted the year Matt left for college were leggy and confused, blooming in blues that didn't match the soil. I opened the door, and the house inhaled me like it remembered who I was. Inside, the furnace made its death rattle. I walked to the kitchen and set my keys in the blue bowl where Daniel used to toss his change. 2 pennies stared up at me with the faces of men who never needed a motel. The garage was cold and smelled like oil and old victories. I found the banker's boxes stacked behind the lawn chairs, records, warranties, envelopes labeled in Daniel's engineer handwriting. I carried them to the dining room table, which was a battlefield scarred by 1,000 plates and one ill-advised attempt to fix a toaster. I sorted for hours, numbers, dates, receipts, a life in paper. When I got tired, I looked out the window at the maple in the yard and watched a squirrel plan his winter like it was a business merger. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How are you? Did Matt send the motel info? We can drop off a casserole later." I stared at the message until the words rearranged themselves into what she meant. "We have done enough. Please remain over there." I typed, "I'm fine," and deleted the rest. At 2, the doorbell rang. The sound startled me like a gunshot in a movie. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, holding a canvas tote that said, "Eat your vegetables" in capital letters. "I made dal," she said, pushing past me into the kitchen like invitation was a concept for people with time. "You are too thin, and your porch light is still blinking. Your son, he will fix? If he does not fix, I will call my cousin. He fixes everything and charges nearly nothing. He is like God, but with pliers." I smiled. "I'll call your cousin." "You will call him today," she said, setting the pot on the stove, "and you will eat. The world is evil, but lentils are good." "Thank you," I said, and my eyes stung so fast I had to pretend to sneeze. She squinted at me, then patted my cheek with a hand that smelled like cumin and laundry soap. "People forget," she said softly, "that the woman who made their bones strong is the same woman they ask to vanish later. Do not vanish." After she left, the house was warm with the smell of garlic and kindness. I ate standing up at the counter, spoon tapping the rim, and felt something in my chest unknot. A small thing, a knot you could miss if you weren't paying attention. I was rinsing the bowl when the mail slot clacked. Junk flyers, a water bill, and a cream envelope with Walsh & Walsh embossed at the top, my appointment confirmation. I tucked it under the magnet on the fridge, the one that looks like a red apple and used to hold Matt's spelling tests. The word necessary was misspelled twice. He cried when I circled it the second time. I made him pancakes shaped like the letter S. Progress comes in ridiculous forms. At 3:30, I changed into my one good blouse and drove back to the diner with a stapled resume I built on the motel's lobby computer. The printer chewed up the top corner like a nervous dog. I smoothed it with my palm, as if that would convince it to lie about me. Manny was exactly what Rita promised. A barrel chest, arms like bridge cables, and eyes as soft as overripe peaches. He listened to me with his arms crossed and then uncrossed them like a verdict. 2 weeks trial, he said. 4 to close, 3 days a week. We'll see if you and the counter get along. She's a jealous mistress. I can charm jealous mistresses, I said, and he cracked a smile. Aprons in the back. Rita will show you where we hide the good spoons. Rita tied the apron around my waist and handed me a pen. Table 6 wants water that tastes like a glacier and coffee that tastes like forgiveness, she said. You'll learn our language. I did. Or I started to. By 7, my feet were bargaining with my spine. By 8, my left shoulder belonged to a mean little knot that muttered obscenities in French. But every time I set a plate down and someone said, "Thank you," like they meant it, a part of me that had been asleep opened one eye. At 9, a couple in their 30s came in. The man in a suit he had no right to be comfortable in. The woman in a dress that looked like it came with strict instructions. They slid into a booth and argued in whispers until the whispers got tired and took a nap. Coffee? I asked. Decaf, she said. Lead me into battle, he said. I poured, and as I did, I saw myself reflected in the window behind them, older than I feel and younger than my son thinks I am, with a smudge of flour on my cheek like a child's fingerprint. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I pretended not to feel it. We closed at 10. I rolled silverware in napkins while Rita counted the drawer. Manny shouted something about inventory in a tone that suggested love hides in complaint. First day done, Rita said, leaning her hip against the counter. You didn't drop a single plate. That's 80% of the job. What's the other 20? Not believing people when they tell you you're in their way. I locked the back door behind me and stood in the cool air like a woman who had outrun a storm by a single step. The motel neon flickered when I pulled in, stubbornly pink against a sky that had turned the color of old denim. I took a long shower that sounded like applause and sat on the bed with Daniel's coat across my lap like a sleeping dog. My phone had 4 messages. One from Rita. You did good. Tomorrow bring sneakers, not those church shoes. One from Mrs. Patel. Cousin will come at 11. Tell him the porch light is an emergency of the soul. One from Walsh's office moving my appointment up to Wednesday. And one from Matt. Mom, can we talk tomorrow? I stared at it until the screen went dark and my reflection stared back. I typed, of course, and almost sent it. Then I erased the words and typed, yes, noon, at the house. If he wanted to talk, he could come where my walls could listen on my behalf. When I turned off the light, the room didn't feel quite as temporary. The Florida stain had shrunk a little, as if the map were making room for a new coast. I slept the way you do when your body is too tired to ask permission from your mind. Morning came with a knock at 11 sharp. Mr. Patel's cousin fixed the porch light in 15 minutes and refused money. Pay me with gossip, he said, or samosas, whichever comes first. At noon, I set 2 mugs on the kitchen table and waited. The front door opened without a knock. My son still had a key because I had never thought to ask for it back. He walked in with his shoulders slightly hunched, like a man who'd been rehearsing his lines and forgot his opening. Hey, he said. Hey, I said, and pushed the mug toward him. Tea. You used to like honey. I still, thanks. He sat. The house rearranged its silence to accommodate him. We talked about nothing first because that's how people with everything to say begin. Weather, work, the hydrangeas. He avoided the word motel the way people avoid the word cancer when it's standing in the doorway, waving politely. Finally, he cleared his throat. About the other night, he said. I waited. I was harsh. You were clear, I said. He winced. Olivia thinks, we both think, we need boundaries. We can't rescue. You from your mother? I smiled, and it felt like baring my teeth. I understand. That's not, Mom, that's not what I meant. I know, I said. It's what you said. He looked at his hands, working a hangnail like it owed him rent. I'm sorry, he said. It came out small and honest, the way apologies do when they're still teenagers. "Thank you," I said, "because that's the only correct answer to a real apology." And he looked up, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to cry over spelling tests and pancakes. "We can help with the bank. I talked to a guy. And you can stay here a few nights if you need." On the couch. There it was, the couch. The thing I had asked for in the rain. It sat between us like a dog we were both a little afraid to pet. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm managing." I let the word hang there like a chandelier. "I have work." Walsh moved me up to Wednesday, and I found Daniel's files. His eyes flicked to the stack of boxes near the door. "You kept all that?" "I kept what mattered," I said. "You'd be surprised how many receipts don't." He rubbed his jaw. "Mom, Olivia worries." "I know," I said. "So do I, but not about the same things." We went quiet again. The house looked back at us and said nothing. He took a sip of tea and made a face, the honey too sweet or not sweet enough. "I want to do better," he said suddenly. It sounded like a man jumping from a moving car and hoping the shoulder was soft. "Then do," I said. "Start with the porch light. It blinks like a nervous tick. Your father would haunt us for less." He stood, relief and discomfort wrestling in his posture. He replaced the bulb Mr. Patel's cousin had already replaced, tested the switch 3 times, then returned like a child with a gold star he didn't entirely earn. "It's fixed," he announced. "It was already fixed," I said gently. "But thank you for fixing it again." He half laughed, half sighed. I'll call you after work." "Call if you have something to say," I said. "Otherwise, just come for dinner on Sunday. Sit at the table. Eat something that took time." His face did something I couldn't read, then settled. "Sunday," he said. "Okay." At the door, he turned. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," I said. "I also know what you said." He left. The door clicked the same quiet click it had used against me 2 nights earlier. It sounded different now. Not kinder. Doors are just doors, but less final. I stood in the kitchen a long time, looking at the boxes, the kettle, the apple magnet that holds old words. On the top of the nearest box, in Daniel's neat print, was a label I hadn't noticed before. Insurance. Secondary. Beneath it, smaller, almost shy, Walsh copy. I slit the tape with a butter knife and lifted a stack of manila folders that smelled like old offices and men who never learned to moisturize. Halfway down, a thin envelope slid free and skated across the table. My name on the front, in Daniel's careful block letters. "Maggie, open if you need the ground to stop tilting." The room sharpened at the edges. The kettle clicked on by itself in my head. Outside, the maple made a sound like applause. I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed it back on the stack like a detonator and rested my hand on top, feeling the heat of a future I wasn't ready to touch. Then I slid the envelope under the apple magnet where the spelling tests used to live. "Tomorrow," I told the kitchen. "Tomorrow, we tilt it back." On Wednesday morning, I woke with the envelope still printed on the inside of my eyelids. "Maggie, open if you need the ground to stop tilting." I made coffee strong enough to scold me and set the envelope in the middle of the table like a polite intruder. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I wanted witnesses when I did. Ink, law, someone who knew how to read the future hiding between lines. Walsh at 2 o'clock would do. Before noon, Olivia texted, "Dinner tonight? My parents are in town. It would be good to reset after the other night." The quotation marks around reset made my skin itch. Still, I said yes. Sometimes you walk toward a bruise on purpose to see if it still hurts. I wore a navy dress with sleeves that forgave the upper arms. Time has a habit of altering, and the pearl earrings Daniel gave me when Matt was born. At the doorway, Olivia smiled like a customer service tutorial. "Margaret, you look nice." Her mother, Trina, appeared behind her, smelling like perfume that cost more than a month of my heat bill. "Darling," Trina said, air-kissing past my cheek. "So good you could join. We were just discussing boundaries, such an important concept for modern families." There it was, a thesis statement with a charcuterie board. We sat. The table glittered with a runner the color of champagne and cutlery, placed with military precision. The kind of staging that says, "This is not a meal, this is an exhibit about prosperity." Matt poured wine and kept not meeting my eyes. Across from me, Olivia's father adjusted his cufflinks, tiny silvery anchors trying to hold his wrists in one place. Conversation was a polite ping-pong match about weather, promotions, and a new restaurant that serves oysters described as transportive. I nodded in the right places and forked salad into a mouth that had no interest in greens. Then the second course arrived, steak sliced into tidy fans, potatoes that sat like obedient clouds, and the topic drifted exactly where it had been waiting to go. "So," Trina began, her tone a velvet rope, "Olivia tells us you've had some hiccups. Perfectly understandable at your stage. It's just that young families need consistency, structure." "Of course," I said. "Structure is good for children." Olivia smiled, the way people smile when they think they've won a point. "Right. And structure includes boundaries, which include motels," her father added, and took a delicate sip of Bordeaux, like he hadn't just put a flea collar on compassion. Matt cleared his throat. "We're all trying to be supportive." "Supportive," I repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar spice. Such a generous word. Olivia set down her knife. "We're talking about sustainability, Margaret. Emotional and financial. We can't be your safety net." "Who was yours?" I asked. "When you needed one?" Her mouth flattened, then re-inflated with diplomacy. "This isn't about the past. It never is," I said softly, "until it is." Silence came and sat at the table like a fifth guest. It folded its napkin neatly. In the kitchen, a timer beeped with the determined cheer of machines that believe in schedule. Trina swooped in to save the mood with dessert, something chocolate-layered, the culinary version of non-disclosure agreements. "We all have to grow," she cooed. "Fly from the nest. Stand on our own 2 feet." "I have stood on mine long enough to wear them out," I said, my smile so pleasant it could pass security. "Tonight, I'm using a chair." Their laughter was the thin kind, high and easily broken. A few minutes later, Olivia collected plates I hadn't finished and launched into a monologue about a promotion track I suspected existed mostly in her head. That's when I heard it. Quiet, meant for Matt's ear alone, but the room threw it to me anyway. "Trina," in an undertone shimmering with pity and impatience, "you cannot let this become your problem. Nip it in the bud. Not my problem. Like a song on the radio you didn't ask to hear again. Even kindness has a breaking point." Mine flickered, then steadied, and something inside me stepped back from the edge, where appeasement goes to die. I rested my fork and folded my hands. "I appreciate dinner," I said, "and the input." "Of course," Olivia said, relief crackling through her voice. "I won't stay long," I added. "I'm meeting Walsh this afternoon, my lawyer." 3 heads snapped toward me in the choreography of startled birds. "Lawyer?" Olivia's father asked, an anchor finally tugged free. "Daniels," I said. "He tied knots well. Sometimes the right ones untie themselves at the right tug." Olivia looked at Matt. "You didn't mention lawyers." "You didn't ask," Matt said, and I watched surprise cross Olivia's face like a shadow of a cloud, brief, cooling, and gone. I stood before dessert. "Thank you for dinner," I said again, and meant it in the limited way one means thanks for instruction you will not be taking. At the door, Matt hovered. "Do you need anything?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For you to come Sunday. For you to eat something I cook and say it tastes like home." He nodded, eyes shiny. "Okay?" The afternoon light outside had that washed gold that makes even unkind streets look nostalgic. I drove downtown to Walsh & Walsh, a building made of old brick and newer ambition. The waiting room smelled like leather chairs and paper whose opinions matter. Walsh ushered me in with the gravity of a priest and the eyebrows of a man born to deliver clauses. "You look like a person carrying a sentence around in her purse," he said, pointing at the tote where the envelope lay like a loaded word. "Shall we read it?" "Please," I said. He slit the paper with a silver letter opener shaped like a sword, too small for any battle that counts. Inside, 2 pages in Daniel's block letters and a photocopy of a document with seals that looked like someone had kissed them with wax. Walsh slid the letter to me first. My hands didn't shake. My eyes might have. I read, "Maggie, if you're opening this, something came loose that shouldn't have. I am sorry. I kept redundancies because engineers do, and because I love you more than my good sense. If pensions tangle or banks pretend not to know their left hand from their other left hand, here is the ground." Then came numbers, dates, a secondary insurance I didn't know he had re-upped. and a trust that used words like irrevocable and life estate in the tender way only a man who loved legalese as foreplay could. At the bottom he'd written, "If our boy forgets who raised him, remember, paper remembers." Walsh leaned back, steepling his fingers so his face perched on a small cathedral. "Your husband," he said, "was a cautious man." "He was a man who hated loose screws," I said, and laughed a little because the alternative was crying. "The pension suspension will resolve," Walsh continued. "But even if it dallies like all bureaucracies do, this," he tapped the trust, "covers your living expenses for a very decent while. The house," he added, "is yours, permanently." Daniel placed it beyond the reach of anyone's panic or ambition. He left a note with the trust. "Maggie gets to choose who crosses her threshold." The room exhaled around me. Something I hadn't noticed holding my ribs too tight let go. I touched the paper like it might pull away if I grabbed. It didn't. "What's the catch?" I asked, because there's always one. "Open a checking account at the trustee's bank. We'll move the disbursement there. You'll get monthly deposits. I'll also send a letter to the pension office that says expedite in Latin, which impresses the sort of people who own stamps." I blinked. "So I won't lose the house." He smiled, and it wasn't the lawyer smile. It was the human one, half tired, half happy. "Maggie, the house would sooner lose us." I pressed my palm flat against Daniel's block letters and felt the old familiar thrum in my chest that used to start when he'd say, "I planned for this." He had. He always had. On my way out, my phone buzzed. A message from Olivia before I'd even reached the sidewalk. "So, lawyer? What's that about?" The swiftness of gossip is an engineering marvel. I typed slowly to give the universe a chance to enjoy the suspense. "About the house." And a trust Daniel set up. All sorted. A pause. Then, "Oh." Followed by a second, "Oh," the digital equivalent of blinking twice. That's good. It was. It was also mine. At dusk, I stopped by the house to switch on the porch light. It burned steady now, a small, unspectacular sun. I made tea and buttered toast and stood in the doorway to the dining room where the banker's boxes had become a landscape of manageable hills instead of a mountain range that could bury a body. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Patel and her husband stood with a plate of sweets. "For your good news," she said. "How did—" "Your cousin told my cousin who told Facebook," she said. "Sit. We will feed you something that tastes like relief." We ate together at my table, 3 people buoyed by sugar and luck and the satisfaction of watching a problem behave under pressure. When they left, I wrapped 2 sweets for Rita and 1 for Manny, because gratitude should travel. At the diner, the dinner rush rose and fell like a small ocean. I moved through it with a rhythm that surprised me, a choreography of plates and people. In the window's reflection, I looked like a woman who had learned a new language in 3 days. At 9:30, a familiar face took a stool at the counter. Matt. No Olivia. Just my son in a jacket that made him look older than he should and younger than he acts. "Coffee?" I asked, as if he were any other man with tired eyes and a decent heart he sometimes forgot. "Please," he said. I poured. He watched the dark rise in the cup like an eclipse going backward. "Walsh?" he asked. "Was kind," I said. "And effective." He nodded. "Good." We didn't fill the quiet with filler. He looked around at the place that had given me a job without asking for a resume written by life's most flattering editor. "You like it here?" he asked. "I like working," I said. "I like coming home tired for reasons I can name." He swallowed, and the motion dragged regret down his throat with it. You should have unlocked your door," I said, "but you will open other things instead." He stared at his hands. When he looked up, the boy was in his face again. That earnest, breakable boy who used to tuck dandelions into a plastic cup and call it a bouquet. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," I agreed. He left a 20 under the saucer and hugged me briefly in the space between the register and the pie case, which is where I have always believed decent men should be measured. Back at the motel, I packed the suitcase I'd arrived with and set Daniel's coat on top, as if crowning something small and stubborn that had won a quiet war. In the morning, I would go home. Not as a woman desperate for shelter, but as the owner of a threshold, with a memory and a lawyer. The neon vacancy sign buzzed outside like a tired insect while I turned off the room's lamp. In the dark, I could hear the pulse of my own blood, and if I tried, the faintest echo of Daniel's laugh. "I told you, Maggie. I always overbuild." "Fine," I whispered into the dark. Overbuild my life then. On the nightstand, my phone lit one last time. A text from an unknown number. This is Elaine from Golden State Pensions. Mr. Walsh reached out. We've expedited your case. Expect a call tomorrow. I thumbed off the screen and lay back. Tomorrow, the ground would be steady. Tonight, I slept without practicing any angles in the dark. Thursday morning, I packed the motel room into a suitcase and the suitcase into the trunk and drove home behind a garbage truck that announced its purpose in bold letters. We take what you don't want. I almost laughed. I had been taken for months, taken for granted until the word mother sounded like free storage and free labor. Today, I decided what I didn't want. I let the truck go first. The porch light burned steady, a small, ordinary triumph. When I carried my bag across the threshold, I set Daniel's coat on the entry chair and opened all the windows as if I could air out memory like cigarette smoke. The house exhaled slowly, a long, forgiving breath. On the dining table, Walsh's neat stack of copies waited beside Daniel's letter. I read it again, standing up, because some news deserves posture. Maggie gets to choose who crosses her threshold. Engineers were practical romantics. They built their I love yous out of load-bearing sentences. I wrote 3 things on a yellow pad and pinned the page to the corkboard where school calendars used to go. Sunday dinner at 6. You are welcome here when you are kind. I will not fund cruelty in any language. It felt childish and absolute. It felt right. At noon, Rita texted me a photo of a pie that had collapsed in the center like a person who remembered a terrible joke too late. We'll rename it Rustic, she wrote. Come in at 4. Manny says the lunch crowd drank their decisions and the evening will be chaos. Before work, I walked to the hardware store and made a practical pilgrimage. New locks. The man behind the counter had the weary kindness of anyone who sells replacement parts to people who wish they didn't need them. He cut the keys while we made small talk about springs and screws. On the way home, I stopped at Mrs. Patel's to leave a note. Tea tonight? Tell me about your cousin with pliers and all the souls he's saved. She slipped a bag of samosas through my mail slot as an answer. Back at the house, I changed the locks myself. It was not graceful. The old deadbolt had opinions about retirement. I had a screwdriver and time. When the last plate clicked into place, I stood on the porch and turned the new key twice, the way Daniel used to do when he wanted the world to understand it had just been told no. At 4, the diner greeted me with burned coffee and the soft percussion of forks. I tied on my apron and stepped into the rhythm. Table 3 wanted rare. Table 4 wanted well done. Table 5 wanted to rehearse an argument with the sincerity one reserves for religion. I poured water like a blessing and coffee like absolution and discovered the small joy of balancing 3 plates without losing a potato to gravity. At 8:15, a pair I recognized took the corner booth, Olivia and Trina. Olivia wore her ambition like a well-cut blazer. Trina was diamonds and disapproval. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the booth was a whispering post. Words travel when they are made of worry. We put the deposit down, Olivia said, voice low and tight. Appraisal next week. If it doesn't close by the 15th, we lose the rate. Your husband needs to firm up his backbone, Trina replied. This is the time to press for access. She's clearly liquid now. Men never understand timing. An old habit, shame, rose up my throat and knocked once on my teeth. I let it stand on the porch. I had changed the locks. When I set down their glasses, Olivia startled like a child caught playing dress-up in the wrong mirror. Margaret, she said, and rearranged her face into something approximating warmth. Small world. Small town, I said. The world is exactly the same size. Trina gave me a glance that suggested I should arrive with a tray and leave with my ears shut. We'll have the salad and the salmon, she said. And more lemon, please. The last lemon was bored. Lively lemon, I said. Coming up. I walked back to the pass and took a breath so slow it had a beginning, middle, and end. People plan their lives like trains, on time, with reserved seats, forgetting the track belongs to the land, not the conductor. I brought their lively lemon and left them to discuss square footage and timelines, as if generosity could be scheduled and summoned. We closed at 10, and I put 2 samosas in a napkin for Rita, because gratitude, again, should travel. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light threw a clean circle onto the steps. In it sat a box I hadn't ordered, Brown, unbranded, taped decisively. No note. Inside, a baby blanket, white and soft as apology. I carried it inside with the caution you reserve for delicate things and bad omens. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. Matt, did you get a package? I did, I typed. No note. We thought. He paused on screen. I could see him forming and reforming the sentence like a child rolling clay. We wanted to tell you Sunday. Olivia's 10 weeks. We don't want to make a big deal, but it's a big deal. I sat down with the blanket in my lap, breath held on the same shelf as my heart. The first thing I felt was joy, heavy and immediate, like rain on a tin roof. The second was fear, lighter, persistent, like a fly with no respect for screens. Congratulations, I wrote. Sunday at 6. We'll make room. He sent a heart, then 3 dots, then nothing. The unsent is a language too. Friday I met Walsh at the bank to open the new account. The manager shook my hand with the slightly overdone sincerity of a man whose job requires him to find money spiritually attractive. Papers slid across his desk like obedient sleds. I initialed. I signed. We moved funds the way you carry a sleeping child. Carefully, grateful they are light. Anything else? He asked, already mentally filing me between a mortgage and a certificate of deposit. Yes, I said. I want to add a trustee instruction. Walsh looked up, attentive. Go on, he said. Daniel created a descendants trust, I continued, tapping the clause he had flagged for me with a yellow tab. For future grandchildren, with me as trustee, distributions at my discretion. I want a letter drafted now. Clear terms. Walsh's eyes warmed the way they do when a plan arrives already wearing sensible shoes. What kind of terms? I looked out the window at a boy holding his mother's hand and an ice cream like a torch. Simple ones, I said. Access follows kindness. We don't fund contempt. We fund care. He nodded slowly. We can attach guidance. Values aren't enforceable in court, but they are enforceable at your kitchen table. He smiled wryly. And that is where real law happens. We drafted the letter at a small side table while the bank manager brought me water in a glass that pretended it had always wanted to host contract negotiations. The letter said what Daniel would have said with less poetry and more precision. Distributions for health, education, maintenance. Distributions contingent on a family culture of respect. Distributions suspended when the house, my house, becomes a place of humiliation. Ready to sign? Walsh asked. I signed. My name looked at home next to Daniel's, like it had found its lane on a road we'd paved together. Saturday passed in a choreography of diner shifts and grocery runs. I made a pot roast big enough for regret and second helpings. I set the table with the good plates and the not-so-good placemats, the ones with a faint T-ring that looks like a moon. I put the baby blanket in a drawer that used to hold Matt's Legos, where it could wait with all the small hard things I've stepped on and forgiven. Sunday at 5:45, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Patel and her husband stood on the porch with a vase of marigolds and a casserole that claimed loudly to be vegetarian. We do not intrude, she said, stepping inside. We merely arrive. You'll stay? I asked. For a few minutes, she said, to bless your table with nosiness. At 6 on the dot, Matt arrived with a bottle of wine his face told me he could not afford. Olivia followed, her smile on a short leash. She wore a soft sweater that made her look almost shy. The room recalibrated slowly, deciding whether the evening would be a negotiation, a truce, or a small miracle. Hi, Matt said. Hi, I said, and hugged him medium, like a bridge you test before crossing. Come in. Olivia handed me the wine and glanced past me into the dining room. It smells wonderful. Mrs. Patel, I said. This is Olivia. Olivia, this is the reason my porch light is no longer an existential crisis. Mrs. Patel beamed. Be kind to mothers, she told Olivia, and your body will remember how to make strong bones in your baby. Then she kissed my cheek and left in a rustle of marigolds and authority. We sat. The roast was tender. The salad was honest. The conversation was neither for the first 10 minutes. We spoke weather, work, and we should do this more. The 3 W's that keep families from either killing or healing each other too quickly. When the plates had been properly scratched and the air no longer smelled like apology, I set down my fork and touched Daniel's letter with 2 fingers, like you do before you read the names in church. I want to show you something, I said, and read aloud the relevant lines of the trust and the letter we'd added at the bank. I didn't watch their faces while I read. I watched the steam rise from the pot roast, as if divinity might curl out of the gravy and instruct us all. When I finished, I slid the papers across the table and met my son's eyes first. They were wet. He blinked hard and then harder. "Dad," he said, and the word was a fist and an open hand. Olivia's face went through a small storm. Surprise, calculation, something like hurt, then something more honest that didn't have a name yet. "So this means—" She trailed off, catching formulations in her jaw like fish and throwing them back. "It means Daniel planned for me," I said, "and for my grandchild. It means I have what I need, and it means any help for the future arrives through kindness, not coercion." Olivia's chin lifted half an inch, the way it does when she's guarding against humiliation. "You did," I said gently. "It's all right to admit it. You were afraid. Fear dresses up as control. I know the costume." Matt put his hand over hers and pressed. "Liv," he said, voice low. "Let's listen." She looked at him, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw the woman under the posture. A young person whose idea of safety had been shaped by people who confused money with love and love with ownership. "I'm sorry," she said. Not to me at first, but to the fork, the plate, the napkin that had seen it all. "For the other night, for dinner, for—" She exhaled. I was scared. "I don't know how to soften." "You start by not sharpening," I said, "and by eating dessert." We laughed then. Actual laughter, the kind that sounds like you remembered a password that opens more than a screen. I brought out apple crisp, warm enough to make the ice cream surrender, and we ate, and for a few minutes the whole room believed in mercy. After coffee, Matt cleared his throat. "About the house we're under contract for." Here it was, the ask approaching, politely dressed. "We're stretched," he said. "The baby changes everything. We thought, if you could help with the closing, just a bridge, we'd pay it back in a year." He waited. Olivia looked at her hands. I folded Daniel's letter and slid it back to my side of the table. The porch light shone through the window, steady, unspectacular. "Here's what I can do," I said. "I will not fund a bigger house so you can rehearse a smaller kindness. I will, however, fund a home." Olivia looked up, confused. "Isn't that what a house is?" "Not necessarily," I said. "A home is where people eat without fear, where not my problem does not greet anyone at the door, where respect isn't conditional on who pays for dessert." Matt swallowed. "What does that look like?" I took out the letter Walsh had drafted for the Descendants Trust, the one with my kitchen table law. "It looks like this," I said. "Help for medical bills, for the baby's needs, for time off work when bodies are tired, for counseling if we need it, which we will, because this is a family, not a miracle. It looks like Sunday dinners where we do not perform, we practice. It looks like the key to my door is held by people who use it gently." Olivia's eyes filled and didn't blink the tears away. She let them sit like guests and didn't apologize. "And the house?" she asked, voice small and brave. "If you can afford it without turning grace into an invoice," I said, "buy it and invite me over when you're ready. If you can't, buy smaller and teach your child that abundance lives in tone, not countertops." Matt laughed once, wet and grateful. "So, not a bridge loan." "You already have a bridge," I said, tapping the table. "Use it to cross the things that matter." Silence settled. A good one. The kind that means everyone is building in their heads. Then Olivia nodded. A simple, real nod. "Okay," she said. "Okay." We moved to the living room where the lamp threw a honeycircle over the rug. I took the baby blanket from the drawer and placed it in Olivia's hands. She rubbed the corner between her fingers the way people do when they are handling something that belongs to a future that isn't finished. Matt leaned into the back of the couch and exhaled the kind of breath that empties a man of pretense and fills him with duty. When they left, Matt hugged me for longer than is fashionable and exactly as long as is necessary. Olivia stood on the porch and turned back. "Thank you," she said. "No performance, no angle, just a sentence I could hang a picture on." After their taillights disappeared, I washed the dessert dishes by hand and let them drip dry while the radio played something soft and unapologetically sentimental. I set the last spoon in the rack and caught my reflection in the dark window. Woman, mother, widow, waitress, trustee, all true, none exhaustive. My phone buzzed. A text from Walsh, of all people. Draft filed. Descendants letter attached to trust. Sleep well, Maggie. You've done something people pay entire seminar fees to learn. You put your money where your values already live. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway to the dining room, looking at the yellow pad where I'd written my 3 bullet points. I underlined the second one with a pen that was running out of ink. It wavered, but held. On the porch, the light kept doing its unspectacular, holy work. I locked the door once, then twice, not because I was afraid, but because I was practicing being the person Daniel had built for and I had decided to become. A woman who chooses the terms of her own threshold, then keeps them. Tomorrow, I would go to the diner and pour coffee the way surgeons suture, steady, necessary, with respect for the body in front of me. Tomorrow there would be small indignities and small glories. But tonight, the house was mine, the table set its terms, and the word problem had a new owner. Monday began with rain again, the good kind, the kind that makes the world smell honest. I took Daniel's letter off the corkboard, slipped it into a folder with Walsh's addendum, and drove to the bank to finalize the trustee instructions. The lobby was busy with people doing the Monday morning math that keeps roofs over heads and futures pointed in a direction. I was halfway to the manager's desk when I heard my name spoken like a secret someone wasn't ready to share. Margaret, Trina, pearls, posture, and a look that could file a restraining order against humility. Olivia stood beside her, hands knitted at her waist. Behind them, Matt, jaw taut as a rope pulled too far. "We were just here," Olivia said. "Checking rates," Trina added, which is what people say when they mean checking leverage. The manager emerged from his office with Walsh in tow. Walsh lifted a hand in greeting. "Maggie, ready?" Trina's smile flickered. "We were hoping," she said lightly, "you might consider a small advance. Bridge money until the closing. Timing is everything in this market. Bridges go over something dangerous," I said. "You make sure they lead to the right shore." Walsh cleared his throat, courtroom pleasant. "The trustee guidance is clear, Mrs. Albright," he told Trina, using a tone that had walked many people back from cliffs. "Health, education, maintenance, and a culture of respect." Trina blinked. "A culture?" "Real law happens at kitchen tables," Walsh said, almost cheerfully. "We've simply written down the obvious." Olivia swallowed. She glanced at Matt, then at me. There was a tremor in her voice that wasn't fear so much as the aftershock of it. "We've been looking at smaller places," she said. "Closer to the diner, actually." My surprise must have shown because she went on, cheeks coloring. "Sunday helped," she said. "The part about countertops. Countertops lie about prosperity," I said. "Tables tell the truth." Trina rallied. "But surely, Margaret, in the spirit of family," I said gently, "we are building something my grandchild can stand on, not something we'll all fall through." Matt's eyes found mine. He nodded once. "Mom," he said quietly, to all 3 women at once, "we're good. We got ahead of ourselves." Walsh escorted me to the manager's desk, where I signed the last of the papers with a pen that tried to make my name more important than it already is. When we finished, he tucked the folder under his arm. "You know," he said as we walked out, "people come in here all day asking for money. You're the first who showed up asking for meaning." "I'm greedy," I said. "I want both." The rain slowed to a glitter. The street shone like it had been polished for an occasion. At the curb, Matt jogged to catch up. "Lunch?" he asked. "Diner," I said. "I get a staff discount if Manny's in a good mood." He grinned. "He's never in a good mood." "Then I get nothing," I said, "but the coffee forgives him." We took a booth near the window. Rita slid 2 menus across the table and arched an eyebrow at my companion. "He looks like the apology portion of a family saga," she said dryly. "Extra toast?" "Please," I said. We ate tuna melts the way sane people do, with a respect for napkins, and talked about small things with big shadows. Ultrasounds, longer lunch breaks, Sunday dinners. He didn't say I'm sorry again. He didn't have to. Apologies are only worth their maintenance, he was maintaining. At 4, I tied on my apron and slipped back into the choreography. A storm rolled in that evening, the kind that rattles cutlery in drawers and gives everyone an excuse to be tender. At 7, the lights flickered once, twice, then failed. The diner inhaled sharply. The room filled with the soft panic of people who forgot electricity is borrowed, not promised. "Candles," Manny barked. "On it," Rita said, already moving. I walked the aisle with a book of matches and a paper bag full of tea lights that smelled like low-budget romance. One by one, little halos bloomed on tables. A married couple with hands that knew the map of each other's fingers. A teenager with eyeliner like armor. A woman in scrubs using soup to negotiate with her appetite. In the gentle light, everyone looked more like themselves. The door opened on a gust, and there was Matt again, damp around the edges, carrying a battery lantern the size of a child. "Thought you could use this," he said, lifting it like an offering. I took it. "What made you think of a lantern?" "You used to keep one in the hall closet," he said. "Hurricanes, blizzards. You said light is a plan, not a mood." "I was a very quotable mother," I said. He grinned. "You still are." He helped us ferry plates by phone flashlight until the power returned with an audible sigh and 3 overlapping cheers. Before he left, he washed his hands at the utility sink and leaned against the counter, watching me refill the sugar caddies. "I told Olivia we're pulling our offer," he said. "Finding something we can carry without asking you to feel small in your own house." I set the sugar down and looked at my son the way you look at a horizon you thought you'd lost. "Good," I said. "Small is a habit that spreads. We're breaking it." He squeezed my shoulder and went back out into the rain, which had the courtesy to be lighter now. The week slid forward on good hinges. Mrs. Patel's cousin returned with pliers and a lecture and made the furnace purr like a chastened cat. Walsh emailed the pension office twice, then called once and spoke the kind of Latin that makes bureaucrats reconsider their hobbies. Rita kicked me out of rolling silverware early one night and pressed a bag into my hands. "You're not allowed to cook," she said. "That's my job. Yours is showing up tomorrow." On Friday, I found a note card slipped under my door in Olivia's deliberate handwriting. "I'm learning how to soften. Thank you for not sharpening." Oh, on Saturday, the diner's breakfast rush felt like a symphony we were all accidentally good at. I moved through the music with a coffee pot in one hand and a plate of pancakes in the other and realized, not like a thunderclap but like a sunrise, that I was happy. Not the giddy kind. The steadier one. The kind that sets your shoulders at the right angle to carry weight without resentment. Sunday came again. I set 3 plates and, because I'm superstitious the way women who have buried love become, a 4th. One for the absent, the returning, the saving grace. Matt arrived on time with flowers wildly too bright for the season and a box of tea Olivia swore would fix everything that aches. We ate. We didn't perform. After dessert, I stood at the sink and watched my son dry the good plates while Olivia put away leftovers with an efficiency that would have made Trina applaud if she'd been capable of applauding anything she didn't plan. When they left, I walked out to the porch with them. The light shone down on our 3 shadows. Matt kissed my cheek. "See you Wednesday," he said. "Doctor's appointment. First time we might hear the heartbeat. Call me when you do," I said. "Or better, make me sit in that freezing room and hear it myself." "You're coming," Olivia said, surprised into honesty. "Please. Please is my favorite key," I said. They went down the steps together, shoulder brushing shoulder, and I stood there and listened to the quiet work of the porch light. Across the street, my neighbor's wind chimes began to speak in the small wind, a language for people who understand that metal can be tender. Inside, I pinned a new note card to the corkboard under Daniel's letter. 3 words only, in my own hand, a sentence I could live inside without cutting myself. "Choose better echoes." When the phone rang, it was the bank woman with a voice like weather. "Mrs. Bennett, I wanted to confirm your disbursement schedule." "Thank you," I said. "Anything else you need?" I looked at the house, at the table, at the yellow pad with its 3 bullet points, at the coat on the chair and the folder on the counter, and the small clean circle of light on the porch where a future could step without tripping. "No," I said. "I have what I need." I hung up and set the kettle on. When the water hissed, it sounded like relief learning to pronounce my name. I used to think safety was a person. Then I thought it was a paycheck. Then a plan. Then a house. Then a boy with a cowlick who said he'd call. The truth is simpler and harder. Safety is a threshold with your name on it. A set of terms you keep even when it rains. A porch light that you replace before it burns out because you respect the work it does when no one is watching. My son told me once, twice, that I was not his problem. For 2 nights, those words were a storm I kept trying to outdrive. Then I remembered I own a roof. I remembered that a woman can be both soft and load-bearing. I remembered that money is a tool, not a leash, and that love without boundaries is just an apology waiting for a calendar. If you're listening from a couch that isn't yours, or a motel with Florida on the ceiling, hear me. You are not a burden for needing shelter. You are a human being. Draw a circle around the parts of you that survived and call it home. Invite in only what feeds you. Fund kindness. Starve contempt. Write your rules on a yellow pad and pin them where your fear can read them. This week I learned to choose better echoes. The old echo said, "Not my problem." The new one says, "That's our table. Sit, eat, speak carefully." The old echo locked me out. The new one hands me a lantern and says, "Light is a plan. Let's make one." When my grandchild asks one day where home begins, I'll show them this door and this porch and this light, and I'll tell them a story about a night it rained and a woman in her late 60s carried a suitcase up steps that used to feel like hers. I'll tell them how the door closed and the world didn't end, how she learned to open other doors, and how the people who loved her learned to knock. And if anyone on that day says, "Not my problem," we will all smile the way people do when a thunderstorm passes without taking the power. We'll pour coffee, we'll pass the sugar, and we'll answer the only way that keeps families from breaking. It's ours, so we're going to do this right. Now, your turn. Tell me in the comments which country and city you're watching from, and if you've ever rebuilt a home out of 3 rules and a porch light. I'm listening.